So two dinosaurs walk onto a boat. Hi, I'm Mark.
Hi, I'm Scott, and this is Church is Lame, the podcast where we fix the church by talking about the stupid thing churches do that break the entire body. Mark, what have you found for us this week?
All right. So, yeah, I shouldn't start laughing before I've even said anything, I guess.
That like sign of things to come.
Yeah, I know, because it's like Answers in Genesis is just kind of like an ever-flowing stream of bad.
Right.
Just bad stuff. I mean, it's like they want to present themselves as being, scientific.
Yeah.
So now they have this article that I found, and it opens up thus. Imagine dinosaurs living with people. The thought sounds ludicrous to a modern mind steeped in evolution, but it's the only reasonable conclusion if the Bible is true.
Oh, God. Oh. Okay.
Yeah, right. It's the only reasonable conclusion. So the Bible that never mentions dinosaurs unless you make some really gross assumptions about the text that cannot be supported through scholarship.
And so all the Christians out there that don't really care one way or the other about dinosaurs, they're just unreasonable now. Nice. Very nice. Well done. Very diplomatic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like if you read this text that mentions nothing about dinosaurs and think, well, hey, dinosaurs weren't there when it was written, you're a dummy. This is the organization just kind of in a nutshell. It's like they regard it as absurd if you just don't agree with them. And of course, it's the only reasonable conclusion. It's like, well, how is your conclusion the only reasonable conclusion? Because it really seems like what they do is they have this just a priori set of values that they apply to the text and then say, okay, that's what it means. I've already made up my mind what the text means. And now you need to read it the same way or else, you're just misguided, I guess.
Yeah, it's crazy. So in the church world, just like any other world, people specialize, right? You can specialize in teaching, or you specialize in pre-K or teenagers, or you can specialize in activity planning, or there's all sorts of different disciplines within the church that you can specialize in. One of those specialties being apologetics, right? The art and the science of proving or disproving the trustworthiness of the Bible. And this is a field full of well-educated, well-meaning experts that come from a range of different disciplines, whether it be writing, whether it be archaeology, whether it be ancient cultures, all sorts of things. But apologetics, for most people, starts with the basis of rationality. And rationality takes you down the path of scientific method, right? Even if you don't start with the same assumptions as most traditional scientists with, the methodology is still the same. You have to prove the things that you believe, and you can't just say, well, we're going to assume that the Bible is right, and we're just going to make far-flung, like these fanciful ideas out of nowhere. You still have to start at a starting place that we all recognize as commonly true, right? And then every assertion you make has to be reasonable and rational, and can't just be, well, it's this way because we say so. And that, if this article feels a lot like that, like, hey, we're going to start with the idea that the Bible is true, and then we're just going to try to figure out ways to insert dinosaurs into the story where they're never mentioned, but we'll make it possible. Well, possible is not trustworthiness. Those are two different levels.
Well, I think the real absurdity of this, right, is that, if you even begin with the concept that the Bible is true, to say that something is true and to say that something is, historically factual, not necessarily the same thing. It's like we can read, a story such as, let's say, C.S. Lewis, okay, like we read The Great Divorce.
Right.
And we can see in there that there is truth in that story. We can see this is a true story, but none of it ever happened.
Right.
And so I think there's this assumption that they have at, Answers in Genesis that, true means that if it says something happened, it had to have happened in factual reality.
Right.
But, there are texts like they've quoted Job in a number of articles I've seen from them, right? And Job is written like a big poem. It's
Right.
not written like historical narrative. There is not much reason to believe that it is trying to recount necessarily historical events,
Right.
but rather perhaps just mythic events. But it doesn't mean that the story is, meant to be read as just useless, meaningless fiction. Its truth is its truth, regardless of whether or not Job was a real person.
Right.
And this another quote that I have here from the article. I think it's like the least self-reflective thing I think I've ever read. It's like we all have a sort of filter or lens we use to look at the world around us. For Christians, this filter must be framed with the truths in the Bible because we are called to take every thought captive to the obedience of Jesus Christ. Again, they are not seeing the framing that they're viewing the Bible through. Is that they're viewing the Bible, I guess it's like you can start with faith in God to believe that the Bible is true, or you can begin with faith in the Bible to believe that God is true. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And it seems like they're coming like saying, well, I have to believe that this book is this certain thing or else I'm not believing in God. And that's really, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It's like, it's goofy, but
Yeah.
do you have a better word for it than that?
Unreasonable.
Yeah. Yes. Unreasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, that passage that you just read, that quote you just read, like wildly out of context. First of all, the idea of taking every thought captive. It is not alluding to like the sciences, right? And that's essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about trying to create a unified theory. Like what they do in science is right now they're trying to create a unified theory of everything. One math equation that explains everything from the galactically big to the infinitesimally small. And they haven't created that equation yet. And it seems to be that what Answers in Genesis is trying to tell us in this article is that they have cracked the unified theory of everything, and
it's the Bible, of course.
And if we don't subscribe to their assertion, then we are not quote unquote true Christians, right?
And that's frustrating to me, just as a believer in general, right? You know, that you have these people that will make these gross claims about what you believe in. Like, how many comments have we gotten that like calling us atheists, right? Because we don't believe exactly the same things, even though we laud that God is real, Jesus is Lord, he died for our sins on the cross, all the good things that like we talk about in the Apostles' Creed, like we affirm all of these truths. And yet, like, we're accused of being atheists because we don't believe that the earth is 6,000 years old and that, humans were riding around dinosaurs like we do horses. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah. Like, I really get stuck on this one because there is that insinuation that our every thought needs to be in agreement with their every thought. And there's a part of me that is really in a mode of, if that's the case, then you are going to be in a continual war of trying to find agreement, right? We understand. So something we understand really well is that we get smarter over time. The knowledge of the world increases over time, right? So you can say that the other way, that as we go back in time, we have less knowledge, right? And that is not a slight on our forefathers and those who came before us to say that there's less knowledge. That is not. Right. That is just a description of how cultures take shape, right? They take shape starting with less and moving towards more, whatever that is, whether that be physical resources, intellectual resources, the things they have, the things they believe, money, right? And so it is no ding on your and my faith to be at peace with the idea that people who did their best to describe the truth of the time weren't going to get it. We're not going to encompass all of truth, right? They have their bit of perspective, right? And they have their agenda. And that's all they're really concerned with, right? So when you start in Genesis and you want to write about the love of God, well, I want to write about how there was nothing. And then God went from nothing and he created more and more and more and more and more just to get to you and I and to have relationship with us, right? That doesn't need any more perspective than that. That is a truth that my 8-year-old girl understands, my 13-year-old boy understands. Everybody in the world, regardless of their faith tradition, understands that truth, that from nothing came everything, just so the love of God could manifest, with all of us here in the real world. You know what I mean? And so then,
Yeah.
people have that instinct to kind of say, well, now I need to turn this into science. And there's no need to. There's just no need to.
No, because the people that were writing these things, it's, Genesis chapters, 1 and 2, I guess just maybe more technically just 1.
Yeah.
It's a cosmogony or cosmogony. I've always pronounced it as a j, not a g.
Right.
But it's a telling of how the universe came to be. It's kind of like a birth of things
Right.
story. And to claim that it's meaning to present an exhaustive history of creation is going beyond the bounds of what these types of texts do in history. Especially if you go and read this thing, it's called Enuma Elish. That is the Babylonian creation story. You get to hear about Marduk and Tiamat and all these good things. If you go and read that, and then you come back and read Genesis chapter 1, it really comes out as very obvious what Genesis is trying to do. And it's trying to tell us about God,
Right.
not us. And not to mention, like, when you view these two creation stories back to back, the theological significance of this creation story that we hold to becomes painfully obvious.
Right. That's a really important point. Yeah, for sure.
And so, like, trying to scientificize, I don't have a good word for this.
Yeah.
Like, as we always say, words is hard anyway.
Absolutely.
So, but it's like here, like they said, okay, we come to a different interpretation of the same facts. That is to say, like the fossil record, the geological record and such. It's like you don't come to the same conclusion and the same facts as you have decided a priori, which means beforehand, in case you've heard me say that already.
Right.
Like, what the heck is he saying? If they decided ahead of time, this is what they're going to affirm.
Yeah.
And then they look at like the geological record, which doesn't support a global flood. Like,
Right.
nothing about it supports a global flood. They look for things and they say, well, that's not what that really means. It's like, well, you have a bachelor's degree in not a, related science, and you don't have an actual higher education and by any like legitimate institution. So how are you coming to the conclusion that all these geologists just don't understand rock?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's aside from it being deeply insulting to people, many Christians who are out there who are working as scientists and mathematicians and physicists, yada, 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 like, you're insulting them
Yeah.
because they believe, that God created the earth in a way such as that we can look at it and understand it for what it is.
Right. Yeah. So in the science world, right, there is a body of people who, oh, hey, here's a fossil, here's another fossil, here's another fossil. They go together. And we found these different methods of dating this stuff. They don't all align, so we're not exactly sure. But we think that they're this year's old, right? And then there's another group of people that they form a narrative, right? They kind of want to take it a step further. Well, we think based off where we find these fossils together, we can imagine how these dinosaurs may have interacted. How, and that to me becomes far less trustworthy than just like, oh, here's some bones and here's how old they are. So now we know that they exist, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing happens among Christian scholars, and even more so among Answers in Genesis, right? We have things that we know through archaeology, through the written records, and just concentrating on what we know could be a lifelong study that is a life well lived, But then we go off on these flights of fancy of things we'd like to imagine. We'd like to, like the way this article talked about, oh, it's hard to imagine men walking with dinosaurs. Well, yes, it is, because because dinosaurs were dated in an entirely different span of time than modern humans were dated. So yes, it is hard to imagine. So the idea that you would take that flight of fancy illustrates to the person who's really seeking truth that you trying to sell me on this idea doesn't really have a lot that I can trust in.
Yeah.
You know, and so it feels like a little bit like, you know how we talk about predatory lending and how lenders will just give people credit cards and loans just because they don't know better.
Mm-hmm.
This feels very much like that. It feels very predatory. Like, hey, like we know that there's a crowd of mostly Americans who are kind of see themselves as simple and see themselves in a kind of like, the Bible is all I need, and I don't need to research anything else. I don't need to know anything else. All I need is this Bible, and I've got all the quote unquote truth I ever need. And it feels a little bit like, hey, we've found our useful idiots, for lack of a better term. And we're going to take advantage of those people for as much as we can.
Yeah, and I don't think that there's any sinister motives behind this. I just think it is that, these are people who believe a thing, who latch on to other people who believe a thing, and then really try to enforce that in a powerful way. Why? Because, this is really practicing what I would just call bibliolatry, right? It's when you take the Bible itself and you make the Bible the idol, the thing you worship.
Right.
Because if you look at the Bible as a testimony passed down, from believer to believer through time, this is a testimony that we're reading, which is trying to testify as to like, this is who God is. This is who Jesus is. We can read that and decide for ourselves whether or not we think it's true and then affirm it or disaffirm it. Right.
Yeah.
But this is like, they're saying like, well, the Bible is a thing you have to believe in. It's like, well, no, I need to believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
I need to believe in Jesus. Like, this is the requirement, that, God so loved the world that he gave his unique son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish.
Yeah.
And that's like, whoever would believe in him, and Jesus said another point, like, this is like this is the work of God, to believe in the one whom he has sent.
Right.
Like, so it's like the way these people elevate the Bible to this thing. It's like they remove it from its historical context and make it a thing that you can just look at, completely devoid of any of the rules of human communication ever. Never mind, like, they ignore the historical place that these texts come from.
Right.
To understand how it's written, what genre is it? How does that genre function in history?
Yeah.
Because if you wrote a sci-fi novel now and I wrote a sci-fi novel, we could be able to compare them and be like, okay, I can see what you're doing. You can see what I'm doing. There's all these, tropes and conventions that we follow.
Right.
But like, these dudes just ignore all of it. And then they have to shoehorn in after the fact. I mean, and what's worse is they get all real pompous about it. Not like I'm not being pompous about this now.
Right.
I recognize that. But I mean, to say, if we interpret those facts through the lens of scripture, the only logical conclusion is that people and dinosaurs were alive at the same time. So that's the only logical conclusion. It's saying that if you don't agree with what they have already decided is true, then you're just not being logical. And like the really obvious thing, right? It's like, well, you say there's this global flood, and there were definitely no dinosaurs after the flood. So because, we look in the historical, we look at the geological record, right? And we can see nothing in the geological record that would support any claims that when their flood is supposed to happen, that there were dinosaurs around.
Right.
And so this is just beautiful here. This is a thing of beauty. So the article says, many will object that dinosaurs were too big to fit on the ark, but that is a common misconception. The majority of dinosaurs grew to be the size of a bison or smaller, and even the big ones started out little. So, right? So their response to like, you can't prove that there were dinosaurs around when this flood supposedly happened. Their answer is, well, no, there were dinosaurs there. And you could fit some of them onto the boat.
All of them except for the big ones. and the flying ones that didn't want to be on there, and the aquatic one. Ah,
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, just like take like a little baby T-Rex, it's like, that big, just like take that with you, it's just, I know it's like they have to go so far to force things into the Bible. It gets utterly ridiculous.
right. And the thing is it stacks impossibility on top of impossibility on top of impossibility, right? Like, hey, let's put a baby T-Rex on the ark that isn't actually structurally sound enough to actually withstand the torsional flexes that a great flood would put on it, right? It's
Details.
details. It's unbelievable, just unbelievable. The other part I just wanted to agree with you about what you said about holding the Bible up as an idol.
Mhm. Hi there. There were some technical difficulties. My camera decided it didn't want to make pictures move anymore. And so for the rest of this video, you're just going to see my unblinking, creepy face. Enjoy.
It's so interesting that that's what happened, considering there are so few people who are actually willing to do, like you said, the deep research of comparing the books of the Bible to the other literature of the times to see, like, oh, hey, like a lot of this is actually, they're actually kind of, I don't want it, like, this word's going to make people mad, but whatever, derivative, right? Like, you can find commonalities for sure. And certainly they are familial, right? So, same culture, same times, same writings. We've talked about this before. We talked about the marketplace of ideas, where some beliefs live, some beliefs die, beliefs go to war with each other to see which ones are going to make it through cultural shifts, through socioeconomic shifts, through ecological shifts, right? There's all sorts of things at play. And so all these belief systems go to war with each other. And just like anything else wants to survive, a belief system wants to survive as well. So you do what you got to do. Sometimes one wins over the other. Sometimes they combine. Sometimes they split apart. To hold the Bible up as the source of truth is not a problem so long as you understand that it is a work that is an amalgamation of many, many, many people's efforts, right? And you get 10 people in a room and try to get them to agree on anything. It's a hard thing, right? So now imagine taking all of humanity who has passed these words on through generation after generation, trying to sustain culture and morality and righteousness through their tribes. These things are going to shift and change, and you and I need to be prepared to know that truth speaks beyond, that truth that you're talking about speaks beyond just the words that are on the page.
Yeah, and like this thing of, calling the Bible God's word versus calling the Bible God's words, right? Like that's an argument we can have.
Yeah.
And like they're calling it here, that this is the true revelation from God is, word for word, what they call it in this article, in the last paragraph. And yeah, true revelation. But the question is going to have to be like, what is it trying to reveal? The Bible is not exhaustive. It does not communicate everything. And if you think it does, you really need to think a little bit harder because, clearly, the Bible doesn't talk about mathematics, but we know that works. Doesn't talk about geometry, none of that. We know that exists. We know it's real. It's useful. We use it. You wouldn't have this thing. I mean, you wouldn't be watching it or listening to this right now if it weren't for all of that, science and that technology, right?
Right.
So it's like the Bible is not an exhaustive text. And it's like they also treat it as if it is touching on everything. So it's like, and when you hold that kind of view of the Bible, of course you're gonna jump to some really janky conclusions,
right?
Because you can't say the Bible touches on everything, but it doesn't talk about this. So now I have to, retcon that into the text somehow, and it gets absurd, And if we want to respect the Bible as God's word, for lack of a better way of saying it, you can't put it up on a pedestal.
Right.
If that might sound really goofy to some people who would be watching or listening to this, right? But the text is a thing that is meant for us as believers to, to read it and read this testimony of our, ancient, brethren and sistren. It is not meant to be some sort of magical document.
Yeah.
If you want to practice a religion where your founding document was dictated by, the gods, then you become a Muslim. They believe that, the Quran, the recitations were recited from an actual text that exists in heaven. That word for word, this is what this heavenly text says. That's what they affirm. But we as Christians have never made that claim. Jews have never made this claim. So it's like we need to kind of put, don't put the cart before the horse. Don't put the Bible before God. Put God before the Bible.
Right. Exactly right. And I'm glad you mentioned the part about the fact that we have these devices in our hands that are supercomputers that we literally fit into our pants pockets.
Mhm.
The same science that puts these incredible appliances in our world, the same kind of reasoning, the same kind of pattern, repeatable pattern of finding yeses and nos and trues and falses and ones and zeros. It's the same kind, it's no different than the thinking that lets us know that it's okay to not stone women made of clothing of different garments. It's okay that we question the reality of a worldwide flood. It's okay if the battles that we read about in the Old Testament, if they didn't really happen the way the Old Testament says they happened, it's okay, because the ones and zeros of understanding the Bible aren't about finding an inarguable debate policy, right?
Yeah.
We are not a debate club, and this is not about winning the argument. The ones and the zeros of the Bible, I've said this before and I will keep saying it. The ones and the zeros of the Bible is a mathematical way to get you to feel peace with yourself, peace with the people around you, and peace or an abiding or shalom or whatever word you use to describe that oneness with God, right? With yourself, with each other, and with God. And if that's not the place you're trying to get to in your faith life, then let me just put it this way. You're reading it wrong.
Good enough for me, man.
And that's all I got to say.
Yeah. So I think we'll put a bow on it there.
Yeah, man, I want to thank you for finding this particular article. Like you want to believe like that, man, this is 2022 and we live in the age of the internet. We live in the age of science and math and reason. We live in the age of some of the most beautiful and inspiring artwork ever made. And yet we just have people who refuse to take in any information beyond the information they took in when they were in Bible school as a kid,
Yeah.
So interesting. So interesting. All right, moving on here. YouTube comments. So once again, we are in awe that we are actually finding a community and that you guys are talking to us and we're listening. And so Soloshini Pillay, I'm sure I got that wrong. I'm so sorry. Responded to the Hillsong video. And the comment was, "We need to pray. Who are we to judge?" And at first I had a knee-jerk reaction, right? Because once again, like anybody who feels criticized, they immediately go to that place like, who are you to judge? What is that venom coming out? And this is the part we make a joke of all the time, like words is hard. And that's because Mark and I truly believe that words are important, right? Like I have no ability to levy a fine on Hillsong. I have no ability to put people in jail. I have no ability to punish them in any way, shape, or form. All I can do is describe what they've done and describe from my point of view why I think that's unhealthy for the Bible. I don't call that judgment, right? I call that counsel. I call that accountability. I call that discipleship, right? Certainly it's my opinion, right? And certainly it's my way of protecting the body, right? But not everything is judgment just because you don't like what it says, right? For like, if Mark, if you were to cut off my hand, I would say stop it, right? And hopefully those around me would say stop it, right? And maybe even
Yeah.
somebody would wrestle that knife out of your hand, and maybe even wrestle you to the ground, right? Just because you don't like the response doesn't always mean that the response is inappropriate. So just know that words are important, and not everything that you don't like is judgment.
Yeah, that works for me.
Yeah, totally.
Just like that, who are we to judge is like there's that part of my brain that kind of goes, you mean, okay, so Paul had written, says, or do you not know that we will judge angels?
Right.
We as the church, right? And this was because people were taking each other to court, and he wanted to say, hey, we have the capacity to judge matters of sin and whatnot, and I hope, that, we don't slip into that judging of the people thing and like condemning people, as if we're God,
Right.
but rather that we are just calling out the sin. I hope we don't cross that line. If people think we're crossing that line, I mean, yeah, yell at us. Come on. We need to be held accountable too. So that's cool.
Right. All right. New subscribers. We love to shout out new subscribers. Always in awe that the number is growing, which is just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is pronounced Risto Kazovsky. So thank you for subscribing. We are really grateful and glad to add you to the growing list. Thank you so much.
But and I hate to point this out, but you know whose name is not on this list?
Who?
Rob Bell.
Rob Bell, the OG.
Yeah, like he just I keep asking him to subscribe, but I mean, I think he's angry at us.
I don't know. Like, I give him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think he's probably a fairly busy guy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, probably.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine it's like all unicorns and rainbows working for Oprah.
Well,
but like in all seriousness, I hope one day we get to the place where we can interview him, and I'm so looking forward to the day that comes.
That would be fantastic.
That would be really cool. Hey, and by the way, we'd love to hear from you. So you can find us all over the web. Like I said, most easily you can communicate with us on YouTube, Church is Lame. But anywhere else on the web that you are, we probably are too. Just look for Church is Lame. And if you want to get us immediately and directly, by all means, email us at churchislamepodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, we are people with lives and busy, so we might not get back to you right away, but we will get back to you because, quite frankly, that is important to us. And I got nothing else to add. What about you?
No, I think that's it for me. I think we're at the end of the so-called line.
Well, sounds good. Thank you again from me to everybody who wants to share this experience with us and think about these things. Laugh, cry, whatever we got to do. But the point is to make the world better, or make our church better.
Yes.
And with that, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and to be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance to you and give you peace. Amen.